I never knew a trip to the post office could lead to a federal investigation, but I guess there's a first time for everything. Especially when it involves Kimberly Welch, our HOA president, a woman so power-hungry she once tried to fine someone for having excessively cheerful Christmas decorations. I'm Frank Oliver, a retired Army veteran who moved to Sunshine Meadows 3 years ago seeking peace and quiet. Instead, I got Kimberly and her reign of petty tyranny over our neighborhood. But even I couldn't have predicted how far she'd go to maintain control. It all started on a Tuesday morning when I stopped by our community mailbox to find an official notice taped to it. Effective immediately, all mail for Sunshine Meadows residents will be held at the post office for HOA verification. By order of the board. I blinked twice, certain I'd misread. HOA verification of our mail? That couldn't be legal. I snapped a photo with my phone and drove straight to the local post office, where a small crowd of my equally confused neighbors had already gathered. "This has to be some kind of mistake," said Sarah Nelson, my neighbor from down the street. Sarah, a single mom who ran a small accounting business from home, looked particularly distressed. "I've got client checks coming in. I can't have the HOA holding my mail." The line inside stretched nearly to the door. Behind the counter, an older postal worker with salt and pepper hair and a name tag reading, Postmaster Jenkins, looked like he was having the worst day of his 30-year career. "For the last time, ma'am," he was saying, his voice strained with forced patience. "I cannot legally give you everyone's mail. That would violate federal law." And there she was, Kimberly Welch in her signature beige pantsuit, designer handbag hanging from her elbow, standing at the counter with a look of pure indignation on her face. "I don't think you understand who I am," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I am the president of the Sunshine Meadows Homeowners Association. We have concerns about unauthorized residents receiving mail at our addresses. As president, I have the authority to inspect all mail coming into our community." Jenkins removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, I don't care if you're the Queen of England. The mail belongs to the addressee, not the HOA. What you're asking for is a federal crime." I exchanged glances with Sarah, who raised her eyebrows in disbelief. This was outrageous even by Kimberly's standards. "I've already arranged everything," Kimberly continued, sliding a document across the counter. "This is a directive from our HOA board authorizing me to collect and distribute all Sunshine Meadows mail. It's for security purposes." Jenkins didn't even look at the paper. "That document means absolutely nothing here. Mail tampering is a federal offense under U.S. Code Title 18, Section 1708. Now please step aside so I can help the other customers." Kimberly's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Do you know how much influence I have in this community? I could have your job for this." That's when Jenkins' professional demeanor finally cracked. "That's it. I've heard enough." He turned to a younger postal worker. "Melissa, call the postal inspector. And maybe the local police too." Kimberly's eyes widened, but incredibly, she doubled down. "Go ahead. When they arrive, they'll explain to you that as HOA president, I have special authority." I couldn't help myself. I stepped forward. "Excuse me, but as a homeowner in Sunshine Meadows, I absolutely do not consent to anyone but the Postal Service handling my mail." Kimberly whirled around, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. "Frank Oliver. Why am I not surprised you'd try to undermine community security measures?" "Security measures?" I laughed. "Is that what you're calling mail theft now?" Several people in line murmured in agreement, which only made Kimberly's face redden further. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming out of the post office, leaving her authorization document behind. I approached the counter once she'd gone. "Sorry about that, sir. She doesn't speak for all of us." Jenkins sighed. "This isn't the first time she's been in here making demands. But this crosses a line." He lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I've already contacted the postal inspector. This kind of thing is taken very seriously." I nodded, relieved someone was finally standing up to Kimberly. But as I left the post office, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. I was right. The next morning, I woke to find an official HOA violation notice stuck to my front door. Speaking against HOA interests in public, $500 fine. So that's how she wanted to play it. I photographed the notice and added it to my growing digital folder labeled Kimberly's Tyranny. Then I called Sarah, who'd also received a violation for the same offense. "This is ridiculous," she said. "She can't fine us for disagreeing with her at the post office." "Apparently she thinks she can," I replied. "But I'm more concerned about what happens when we don't pay these bogus fines." "Lien on our houses?" Sarah suggested, the worry evident in her voice. "That's her usual threat." She wasn't wrong. Kimberly had become notorious for threatening liens over the most trivial violations, everything from unapproved mailbox decorations to excessive bird feeding. "I think it's time we attended a board meeting," I said. "Find out exactly what's going on with this mail situation." The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for that Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. Normally, these meetings attracted maybe 10 people at most. But when I arrived 15 minutes early, the room was already packed with at least 40 residents, all buzzing with anger about the mail situation. At precisely 7 p.m., Kimberly entered with the other 4 board members trailing behind her like ducklings. She looked momentarily taken aback by the turnout, but quickly composed herself. "I see we have quite the attendance tonight," she said with a tight smile. "How wonderful to see such community engagement." The meeting began with the usual administrative matters, but the tension in the room was palpable. Finally, during the open forum, I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Oliver?" Kimberly said with thinly veiled contempt. I stood up. "I'd like to address the notice placed on our community mailbox stating that all mail would be held for HOA verification. Can you explain the legal basis for this policy?" Kimberly straightened her posture. "Certainly. As president, it's my duty to ensure community security. We've had reports of unauthorized occupants receiving mail. The board voted to implement a mail screening process." I looked at the other board members, who suddenly seemed very interested in their notepads. "Did the board actually vote on this?" I pressed. One of the board members, Ted Jenkins, no relation to the postmaster, cleared his throat. "Well, we discussed concerns about unknown people possibly receiving mail, but I don't recall voting on holding everyone's mail at the post office." Kimberly shot him a look that could have frozen lava. "Perhaps you weren't paying attention, Ted. It was clearly outlined in last month's agenda." "I have the minutes from last month," called out Sarah from the back, waving a printed document. "There's nothing in here about mail verification." The room erupted in angry murmurs. Kimberly banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! We will have order!" she demanded. "This is exactly why mail verification is necessary. Too many unauthorized residents causing disruption." An elderly gentleman stood up shakily. "I've lived here for 15 years, and I've never needed anyone's permission to get my social security checks." Another resident chimed in. "My medication comes by mail. Who are you to hold that up?" Kimberly's composure was slipping. "The policy is for your protection. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't be concerned." That's when the back door opened, and a man in a dark blue uniform stepped in. The postal inspector's badge on his chest gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Kimberly Welch?" he called out. "I'm Inspector Rodriguez with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. I need to speak with you regarding some serious allegations of attempted mail theft and fraud." The room fell silent. Kimberly's face went from red to white in an instant. "This is a private meeting," she stammered. "You can't just barge in here." "Actually, ma'am, I can when investigating federal mail crimes. Would you prefer to speak privately, or shall we continue this conversation here?" Kimberly grabbed her purse. "We'll speak outside." She turned to the board. "Continue the meeting. This is clearly a misunderstanding." As they left, the room exploded into conversation. I exchanged looks with Sarah, who mouthed, "Wow," at me from across the room. But the real bombshell was yet to drop. While Kimberly was outside with the inspector, Ted Jenkins hesitantly approached the microphone. In light of these unusual circumstances, I think there's something the community should know." He pulled out a folder. "I've been keeping copies of some, concerning financial documents." The room hushed again as Ted explained that for the past 2 years, Kimberly had been directing HOA violation fines to a separate account, one that wasn't in the official HOA books. "The official account shows we collected $23,000 in fines last year," Ted explained, his voice gaining confidence. "But according to these bank statements, over $45,000 was actually collected. The difference never made it to our HOA treasury." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah had made her way to sit beside me, and I could feel her shock matching my own. "There's more," Ted continued. "The mail verification scheme? I found a draft contract with a private security consultant who would be paid $1,000 weekly to screen all mail. The company is registered to Kimberly's brother-in-law." The meeting descended into chaos after that revelation. Some residents were calling for immediate legal action, others wanted to dissolve the entire board. In the midst of the uproar, Inspector Rodriguez re-entered, alone. "Folks," he called out, waiting for the noise to settle, "I've just placed Mrs. Welch under preliminary detention pending an investigation into mail fraud. Given what I've just heard about financial irregularities, I strongly suggest someone contact the local police as well. This appears to extend beyond mail crimes." The following weeks were a whirlwind of revelations. A forensic audit revealed Kimberly had embezzled over $120,000 from the HOA over 3 years through her scheme of phantom fines and skimming from legitimate ones. The mail verification plan would have given her access to financial documents, checks, and personal information she could have used to further her fraud or even for identity theft. As it turned out, our community mailboxes had been perfectly secure. The unauthorized residents receiving mail was a problem Kimberly had invented to justify her scheme. The legal consequences came swiftly. Kimberly was charged with attempted mail fraud, embezzlement, and multiple counts of fraud. Her brother-in-law, who had been complicit in the mail scheme, also faced charges. The remaining board members, except for Ted, who became a key witness, resigned in disgrace for their negligence. 3 months later, we held a special election for a new HOA board. To my surprise, many neighbors nominated me to run for president. "You stood up to her when it mattered," Sarah told me when she dropped off her nomination form. "That's the kind of leadership we need." I was reluctant at first. I'd moved here for a quiet retirement, not a second career in community politics. But seeing how Kimberly had exploited everyone's apathy to build her little empire of corruption, I decided maybe I could help rebuild something better. The day after the election, which I won by a landslide, I ran into Postmaster Jenkins at the grocery store. "Congratulations, Mr. President," he said with a wry smile. "Planning any visits to the post office soon?" I laughed. "Only to pick up my own mail, I promise." "Good man. You know, in 30 years I've seen people try some crazy things, but demanding an entire neighborhood's mail? That was a first. Well, I've got a feeling our community will be much more boring from now on," I said. "And that's exactly how we like it." As I wheeled my cart away, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since moving to Sunshine Meadows. Our HOA wasn't perfect, no organization run by humans ever is, but at least now our mail was safe, our fines were legitimate and rare, and our community decisions were made in the open. And every time I check my mailbox now, I smile, appreciating the simple joy of receiving my mail without anyone else's verification. Sometimes it takes a power-hungry Karen at the post office to remind us all how valuable our everyday freedoms really are, and how important it is to stand up for them, even in the smallest of ways.